Russians are set to cast their ballots this weekend in the presidential election there. The current president, Vladimir Putin, is expected to win another 6-year term in power, making him the longest-serving Kremlin chief since Josef Stalin. SABC News' correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is watching developments for us in that country and joins us now for an update. And it's great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed for making time, Dasha. Let's begin by just having you place where you are in Russia as we get a sense of just how much of a response there's been from ordinary people in taking part in this poll.
Well, I'm outside a polling station in Moscow, and ever since this morning I've seen people getting inside and casting their ballot for the next president. And even though it is the shortest ballot in the history of modern Russia, with only 4 candidates listed, we understand that people are willing to come and cast their ballots. Also, this year, the Russian people are able to cast their ballot online. They have this option for the first time in the presidential election. They are also coming to the polls for 3 days instead of just 1. That's yet another novelty. So the authorities are doing everything possible to ensure that the turnout in this year's presidential election is high. The expectation, according to the Russian pollsters, is that about 70% of Russians will cast their ballots over the course of these 3 days. We also have seen people in the so-called new territories of Russia casting their ballots all the way since the 25th of February. That was the early voting. And so the general sense among the Russian voters is very positive. They do say that they have to exercise their civic duty. That's at least among the people that we have been talking to over the past few days. We also have heard from the Russian people that they do want to vote for continuity and to preserve the current course, because they do see no other alternative at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about alternatives, I mean, many in the commentariat are suggesting that Vladimir Putin is pretty much set for yet another term. However, there are still people who are opposing him. 3 opponents, I understand, who are also vying for the presidency.
Well, that's right. The total list of candidates is 4, and the other 3 candidates are all members or all the representatives of the State Duma parties. This is the so-called system opposition. Vladislav Davankov is a representative of Russia's New People Party that has only recently gained seats in the Russian parliament. Leonid Slutsky is the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. He took over from Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the charismatic but populist leader of the party. And Nikolai Kharitonov is the communist representative, who is 75 years old. Traditionally, the second seat in Russia's presidential election was going to the Communist Party, but this year political scientists say it is very unlikely that the communists will be able to secure the second place. So the understanding is that obviously the candidate who will take the second place will be representing those who are unhappy or not fully satisfied with the ongoing policies of the incumbent President Vladimir Putin. But that's yet to be seen, whether that will be one of the 3 remaining candidates.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying that a lot of domestic and, let's say, global geopolitical events are likely to feed into this election. From our vantage point, we've watched very closely the story around the leader of the Wagner group, him having died earlier on last year, I think it was late. Also what took place this year is the death of Alexei Navalny and the mystery around what might have happened there. I wonder to what extent that has a bearing on how people feel about this election and what the outcome may be.
Well, certainly we have seen lines of people queuing to add their signature to the campaign of Boris Nadezhdin, another presidential hopeful, an independent candidate who yet failed to meet the criteria by the Russian Central Election Committee and to get on the ballot. We have seen thousands of people attending the funeral of the late Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, labeled as terrorist and extremist by the Russian authorities. So certainly that does show us that there is an appetite for an alternative phase, something that Russians have not seen in quite a while. But that's unclear whether that alternative phase could be coming from the so-called system opposition or from elsewhere. One way or another, what Russians have been saying for now is that the vast majority are going to vote for the continuity, both domestically and internationally, as they do see no other viable alternative to the incumbent President Vladimir Putin at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be remiss not to speak about the war in the east of Europe involving Russia and Ukraine. There had been, depending who you ask, a sentiment about people growing apathetic about this war because of just how long-standing it's been and just how much it may be draining on the human capital of people in Russia. You've already mentioned several times that it doesn't seem to have deterred people from showing up to cast their ballot. But I wonder just how high up their agenda you reckon it is for people in deciding how to vote.
Well, obviously, the operation in Ukraine is having an impact on the electoral preferences. But surprisingly, if you talk to the representatives of the pollsters, they do say that the operation in Ukraine has only solidified and consolidated support for the incumbent President Vladimir Putin. The reason is that no matter what Russians feel about this operation, they do want it to end as soon as possible, because it is very painful for many to see these two brotherly nations being in the state of conflict. But they also do understand that it is under the leadership of the incumbent president that the operation could end sooner and on the terms that are acceptable to their own country. At the same time, we have seen several economic developments in Russia. The economy has been showing good numbers of growth, and this is another thing that the Russian president has been campaigning on. So certainly there are many issues that are on people's minds when they go to the polls. But obviously, one of the main questions that people have is what happens after 2030, because it is a foregone conclusion that Vladimir Putin will be winning in this year's election. But what happens next when the next presidential election is on the agenda is absolutely a question that is still to be answered.
Absolutely. It's day one of 3 days of this presidential election, so we'll certainly have more time to ventilate the many issues that are likely to emerge in the days ahead. But for now, Dasha Chernyshova, our correspondent here on the SABC, live to us there from the Russian capital, Moscow. Thanks very much indeed.